I never imagined I would be standing in my own living room staring at my mother-in-law as she smirked and told my daughter she wasn't part of the family. The words came right after she handed brand new iPhone 16 Pro Maxes to her other grandchildren, their eyes wide with excitement, their fingers already unwrapping the sleek silver boxes. My daughter sat frozen, her hands empty, her smile fading into confusion. Then my mother-in-law turned to her voice, dripping with a condescending sweetness, and said, "Oh, honey, you know why. You're not really one of us." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. For 2 years, she had lived under my roof, rent-free, eating my food, using my electricity, inserting herself into our lives like a queen who believed she owned the castle. For 2 years, I had bitten my tongue through her little jabs and her barely disguised favoritism. But now, in front of nearly 40 people, she had humiliated my daughter in the cruelest way possible. I looked at my little girl, her cheeks flushing red, her eyes glassy, and I knew I couldn't let this pass. My mother-in-law probably thought I would just scold her privately, maybe cry in my bedroom and hope things got better. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. What she didn't realize was that I had been watching quietly, collecting every slight, every dismissive comment, every twisted smile for months. She didn't realize that I was ready. This wasn't going to be a teary confrontation where I begged her to be kinder. This was going to be the last day she would ever hurt my daughter inside this house. With a calmness I didn't even know I had, I stepped forward, smiled back at her, and said, "You have exactly 24 hours to get out of my house." She laughed as if I was joking. But I wasn't. By the end of the next day, she would be gone, and I was going to make sure she never forgot why. When Laura and I first got married, I knew her mother, Mary Ann, was opinionated, but opinionated I could handle. What I didn't expect was the way her opinions would seep into every corner of our lives once she moved in. It happened 2 years ago, right after my father-in-law passed away. Mary Ann said she couldn't keep up with the expenses of her big old house anymore. She painted a picture of herself as a fragile widow struggling to get by on a modest pension. Laura, being the generous and compassionate person she is, immediately suggested that Mary Ann come live with us. At the time, it made sense. We had a spacious 3-bedroom bungalow in a quiet California suburb, and our daughter Emily was thrilled at the idea of having her grandmother close. We cleared out the guest room, bought new bedding, and even added little touches like fresh flowers and a reading chair to make her feel welcome. The first few weeks were fine. Mary Ann baked pies, told stories from her childhood, and made a big show of helping with Emily's homework. But slowly, the cracks began to show. It started small. Mary Ann would make little comments about Emily's clothes not being ladylike enough, or suggest that she spend less time drawing and more time doing something useful. Emily loved art. She would spend hours at her desk sketching, completely lost in her imagination. I loved that about her. But Mary Ann didn't see it as a talent, she saw it as a waste of time. Then came the comparisons. Emily's cousins Mark and Sophie were always the gold standard. Mary Ann would gush about Sophie's piano recitals and Mark's soccer trophies at dinner, making sure Emily could hear every word. When Emily tried to share her own achievements, like winning first place in her school's art competition, Mary Ann would nod distractedly, then steer the conversation back to the other grandchildren. I noticed the way Emily's shoulders would slump, how she would push her food around her plate instead of eating. I talked to Laura about it more than once, but she always brushed it off. "Mom's just old-fashioned," she'd say. "She'll warm up to Emily." I wanted to believe that, but something told me Mary Ann wasn't just old-fashioned. She was selective, calculating even in who she gave her affection to. And Emily, for reasons I didn't yet understand, had never been on that list. Over time, Mary Ann began acting like the house was hers. She rearranged the furniture without asking. She started making comments about my job as a middle school science teacher, how it was cute that I was so passionate about teaching, even if it didn't bring in much money. She'd tell Laura she could have married up if she'd tried harder. It was always said with a laugh, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't ignore. The worst part was the secrecy. Mary Ann would get packages delivered almost daily, big boxes from expensive stores. She'd whisk them away to her room before anyone could see what was inside. When I asked her about it once, she claimed they were gifts for friends or just a few things Thomas Laura's brother asked her to store. I didn't buy it. I'd seen the way her eyes lit up when talking to Thomas's kids. They were her real grandchildren, her words, not mine, muttered under her breath one day when she thought I was out of earshot. That was when I started keeping track. I noted every slight, every time she went out of her way to make Emily feel like she didn't belong. I wasn't looking for a fight, I was looking for a pattern. And sure enough, the pattern emerged. Every holiday, Mark and Sophie got the expensive gifts. Every birthday, they got the big party contributions. Emily, a generic sweater, a cheap journal, or sometimes nothing at all. Laura didn't want to see it, but I could feel her starting to notice. One night, after Mary Ann skipped Emily's school art show to attend Sophie's piano recital 2 towns over, Laura came home looking deflated. She could have made it, she said quietly, almost to herself. She just didn't want to. I didn't say anything, but I could see the shift starting. Laura was beginning to see Mary Ann the way I saw her. And that was when I knew when the day came we were going to stand together. We just needed the right moment. I didn't realize that moment was only weeks away and that it would come wrapped in shiny silver paper with an Apple logo on top. From the outside, life in our house probably looked picture perfect. We had a well-kept lawn, flowers blooming along the white picket fence, and family dinners almost every night. But inside, it was a slow drip of poison, never enough to kill outright, just enough to make you sick over time. Mary Ann's stabs at Emily were always small enough to be brushed off as misunderstandings. She'd call her sweetheart in a syrupy tone, then follow it up with a backhanded remark. Sweetheart, maybe if you smiled more, you'd have more friends. Or sweetheart, don't worry about soccer. Some kids just aren't athletic. Emily would nod politely, but I could see the words sink in. She started to spend more time in her room, sketching quietly instead of joining in after dinner conversations. The favoritism toward Mark and Sophie only grew. Mary Ann would FaceTime them in the middle of our dinners, showing off whatever new gadget she'd bought them. Once, she even asked Emily to take the phone so she could say hi to the lucky ones. I'll never forget the look on Emily's face when she handed the phone back without a word. I tried to confront Mary Ann in small ways, but she was slippery. She'd laugh off my comments or turn them back on me. You're so sensitive, Daniel. I'm just teasing. You can't raise a child in a bubble. It wasn't teasing. It was conditioning, and she was doing it deliberately. I started paying closer attention to her spending habits. Packages kept arriving, designer clothes, expensive perfumes, high-end kitchen gadgets. I knew her pension couldn't cover that, which meant she had money stashed somewhere. Every time I asked about it, she'd act offended. I don't have to explain myself to you, she'd say, retreating to her room with her latest delivery. Laura was still caught in the middle. She didn't like the way her mother treated Emily, but she couldn't bring herself to believe her own mom was doing it on purpose. That was the genius of Mary Ann's game. She kept everything just shy of blatant cruelty. But cracks were starting to show. Emily had a school art showcase one Friday evening. She'd been working on a large watercolor piece for weeks, a bright, swirling depiction of a night sky that made me stop in my tracks when I first saw it. She wanted her grandmother there. She asked her twice. On the day of the showcase, Mary Ann claimed she wasn't feeling well. Later that night, Laura found out she had driven across town to attend Sophie's school talent show instead. I think that was the moment Laura's blind loyalty began to fade. She lied to Emily, Laura said in bed that night, her voice tight. She looked her in the eye and lied. I didn't say I told you so. I just nodded because I knew the moment Laura saw the truth for herself, everything would change. And still Mary Ann kept pushing. She made snide comments about how much space Emily's art supplies took up, hinted that maybe Emily would be better off spending summers with her real cousins, and once, while she thought no one was listening, muttered, "Blood is blood. Everything else is temporary." I started to wonder if Mary Ann was actively trying to drive a wedge between Laura and me. She'd make little remarks about how hard I worked for so little money, or how maybe Laura should think about her future. I didn't bite. I knew what she wanted, a conflict she could exploit. Instead, I started documenting everything, every insult, every slight, every time Emily's name was missing from the family group text because Mary Ann forgot to include her. I saved receipts, took photos of the gifts Marianne lavished on Mark and Sophie, even noted down the times she didn't feel well for our events, but was perfectly fine for theirs. It was like preparing for a trial, and in a way, that's exactly what it was. The case I was building wasn't just about Emily's feelings. It was about establishing a pattern of deliberate exclusion and cruelty. I didn't know exactly when the breaking point would come, but I knew it was coming. And when it did, I would be ready to make sure it was the last time Marianne ever had the chance to hurt my daughter. The day my suspicions stopped being just gut feelings came on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home grading science projects at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. Another package. Big box high-end shipping label addressed to Marianne. I carried it to her door and knocked. No answer. I was halfway back to the kitchen when I heard the door creak open. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her pull the box in and shut the door again. Normally, I would have left it at that, but something about the way she moved, quick, almost panicked, made me pause. I went back to the front porch and saw a small slip of paper on the welcome mat. Bank of Westfield. It was a deposit slip folded once with Marianne's name printed at the top. I picked it up. The numbers hit me like a slap. $38,000. She had a savings account. All this time, she'd been living in our house for free, eating our food, pretending to scrape by on a modest pension, and she had 38 grand tucked away. I slipped the paper into my pocket. This wasn't about money. This was about control. The more dependent she seemed, the more guilt she could weaponize against Laura. That night, I didn't say anything to my wife, not yet. Instead, I started looking for patterns proof that couldn't be explained away. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on her room whenever she left the house. I wasn't snooping for the thrill of it, I was documenting. The packages she ordered: designer handbags, unopened bottles of imported wine jewelry. I took photos of the receipts. I began to keep a hidden notebook in my desk drawer. Every insult toward Emily, every missed event, every instance of her making Laura choose between us went into that book. I backed it all up digitally with timestamps. Then came the real smoking gun. I walked into the living room one morning to grab my coffee and heard her voice drifting from the kitchen. 2 iPhone 16 Pro Maxes. Yes, both silver. They'll love them. Her tone was light conspiratorial. I stood still, listening. Of course not. Not for her. Why would I spend that kind of money on someone who's not even blood? She laughed, the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. She was talking to Thomas. I didn't confront her then, I just made a note of the date, the time, the exact words. I knew what she was planning, and I knew she'd try to disguise it. But now I had it in her own voice. A few days later, I accidentally saw the credit card statement on the hall table. 2 charges from an Apple store each for $1, $249.99. And just like that, her little secret was out in the open. She'd been buying expensive gifts for the other grandchildren while continuing her campaign to make Emily feel like an outsider. The fury that boiled in me wasn't just about the money, it was about the precision of her cruelty. She wasn't careless, she was calculated. She wanted Emily to notice. She wanted everyone to notice. She wanted my daughter to sit there empty-handed, feeling less than. I didn't tell Laura right away. I needed her to see it with her own eyes. And I needed to make sure that when the time came, there would be no room for doubt, no opportunity for Marianne to twist the story. So I waited. I tightened my record-keeping. I saved every scrap of evidence, every gift receipt, every overheard comment. I was preparing for a battle, but not the kind that ended in shouting matches or slammed doors. I was preparing for a clean kill, the kind of confrontation that leaves the other person with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no one to believe them. And when the day of the party finally came, I was ready. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew this Marianne thought she was going to humiliate my daughter in front of the family. She had no idea that she was walking straight into the moment she would lose everything. The birthday party was held at the community center on the edge of town, the same place we'd used for family gatherings since Emily was in preschool. It had high ceilings strung with twinkling lights, long tables covered in white linen, and a stage at the far end where kids usually tore into their presents. This year, we were celebrating Emily's 12th birthday alongside her cousins Mark and Sophie, who were turning 10 and 13. Laura and I had worked hard to make the day special colorful decorations, a buffet table full of everyone's favorite foods, and a large cake with all three names written in bright icing. Marianne arrived fashionably late, wearing a silk scarf and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had two neatly wrapped boxes under one arm and a tote bag that looked heavy. Emily ran up to greet her, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Marianne had decided to be kind for once. That hope lasted less than 10 minutes. When it came time for the gifts, Marianne took center stage. She made a little speech about how proud she was of her grandchildren and how much she loved seeing them grow into wonderful young people. Then she turned to Mark and handed him one of the boxes. He tore off the paper and gasped, an iPhone 16 Pro Max gleaming under the overhead lights. Sophie got the same treatment with the second box. The room buzzed with murmurs and exclamations, and then all eyes turned to Emily. She sat up straighter, her face lit with anticipation. Marianne reached into her tote bag and pulled out a paperback coloring book, a cheap one, the kind you'd find in a dollar store bin. "For you, sweetheart," she said with that same condescending sweetness. "I thought this was more your style." The words hit like a punch. Emily's smile froze. "But, Grandma," she said softly, "I thought—" "Oh, honey," Marianne interrupted. "You know you're not really family." Blood is blood. The room went still. Even the kids stopped fidgeting. My chest tightened and I could see Laura stiffen beside me. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and before anyone could say a word, she bolted from the stage, pushing past guests as she ran out the side door. The air in the room was heavy with discomfort. A few relatives laughed nervously, others shifted in their seats. Marianne just stood there beaming as if she'd delivered some charming punchline. That was when I knew the moment had come. I walked up to her slowly, my voice steady. "Marianne, you have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and leave my house." She blinked, then laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Daniel. You can't just throw me out." I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile. "Oh, I can. And I will." The murmurs around us grew louder. Marianne tried to play it off, telling the guests I was overreacting and that kids today are too sensitive, but the performance had cracks. People had seen the cruelty for themselves. Laura joined me on the stage. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Mom, that was unacceptable. You humiliated Emily in front of everyone." Marianne scoffed. "She'll survive, and so will you." "Honestly, Laura, I'm disappointed in you. You used to have thicker skin." Laura didn't answer. She just looked at me and nodded. We didn't need to say anything else then. The next 24 hours were already in motion. That night, after the party, I pulled out my file. I showed Laura everything: the deposit slip, the gift receipts, the overheard conversation about the iPhones. Her face hardened as she flipped through the pages. "She's been lying to me for years," she said, finally, her voice low. "This ends tomorrow." The next morning, I waited until Marianne came into the kitchen for her coffee. I placed the folder on the counter and slid it toward her. "Every insult, every lie, every time you went out of your way to make Emily feel unwanted, it's all in there." She flipped through a few pages, then tossed the folder back. "You think anyone's going to care about your little diary?" She sneered. I leaned in. "No, but they'll care about the audio, and the receipts, and the fact that every single one of these things can be proven." Her eyes flickered just for a second. Then she tried to regain her smugness. "I'll talk to Laura. She'll never let you do this." "Laura's already seen it," I said. "She knows everything." The color drained from her face. "I gave her the deadline again midnight. She tried calling Thomas." I could hear her in her room spinning the story to make herself sound like the victim. "I also heard him ask Mom, 'Is it true?'" She didn't answer. That evening, she started packing. She muttered curses under her breath every time she passed me in the hall, but I didn't respond. There was no point. She'd lost, and she knew it. By the time midnight came, her suitcases were stacked by the door. Laura and I stood together as she wheeled them out. She didn't look at Emily. She didn't say goodbye. She just stepped into Thomas's car and drove away. I closed the door, locked it, and turned to my daughter. "It's over," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. If Marianne thought leaving our house meant she was out of the storm, she was wrong. I wasn't done. The party incident might have been the final spark, but the fire had been building for years, and I wanted to make sure every bridge she'd tried to control was burned to ash. The morning after she left, my phone lit up with notifications. Family group texts, Facebook tags, and a dozen missed calls. Marianne had gone public. She'd posted a long, dramatic Facebook status painting herself as the victim, a frail widow thrown out of her daughter's home by a manipulative son-in-law. She wrote about being replaced and watching the family she built turn against her. Not a single word about Emily, not a single word about the iPhones, and certainly nothing about the bank account, the receipts, or the calculated cruelty. For the first hour, it worked. Comments poured in from her friends and distant relatives calling me heartless, telling Laura she should be ashamed. Some even hinted they might take legal action to protect Marianne. I didn't respond. Neither did Laura. Instead, I created a private group chat with the people whose opinions actually mattered: close family. A few mutual friends who had seen Marianne's behavior firsthand, and most importantly, Thomas. I uploaded 3 files: the audio of her telling Thomas she'd never buy Emily anything expensive because she's not real family, a scanned copy of the deposit slip showing her savings, and the receipts for the 2 iPhones purchased days before the party. Then I sent one short message: "Here's the truth. Do with it what you will." It didn't take long. The group went silent for a few minutes, and then the messages started. Shock, anger, apologies. Thomas called Laura almost immediately. I heard her side of the conversation from across the room. "Yes, I saw it. Yes, it's all real. No, she's not welcome here." After that, I moved to phase 2. Laura made a single public comment under Marianne's Facebook post: "Mom, I'm sorry you chose to make this public with a version of events that isn't true. I have shared the full truth privately with family. This decision was to protect my daughter. I will not discuss it further here. No insults, no defense, just a statement of fact." It was devastating in its simplicity. Within an hour, the tide turned. People who had jumped to Marianne's defense began deleting their comments. Others posted vague apologies. And then Marianne deleted the post entirely. But I didn't stop there. I'd learned a long time ago that silence could be as powerful as action. Marianne thrived on control of the narrative, of the emotions in the room, of the guilt she could leverage. So I cut off her oxygen supply. No calls returned, no messages answered, no engagement at all. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table working on a new drawing. She looked up at me and said, "Does this mean Grandma's not going to say mean things to me anymore?" I sat down beside her. "That's exactly what it means." Laura joined us, placing a small wrapped box in front of Emily. "This is from us," she said. Emily opened it slowly. Inside was an iPhone 16 Pro Max Shiny Silver, brand new. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she grinned. "But won't Grandma be mad?" she asked. "She doesn't get a vote anymore," I told her. That was the heart of it. This wasn't just about kicking Marianne out. It was about taking back control of our home, our family, and our peace. A week later, Thomas called Laura again. He told her that after seeing the evidence, he couldn't let Marianne stay with him either. She had moved into a small apartment across town. No one had offered to help her, not out of cruelty, but because they'd all finally seen her for who she was. And in that silence, I felt something shift. We hadn't just won. We'd dismantled her power completely. She could spin whatever story she wanted, but the people who mattered already knew the truth, and there was nothing she could do to change it. The house felt different after Marianne was gone. Quieter, yes, but not the kind of quiet that comes from absence. It was the kind of quiet that comes from relief. The air didn't feel tense anymore. I didn't walk into a room bracing myself for a cutting remark. Emily started spending more time in the living room again, sketching at the coffee table while Laura and I cooked dinner together. It took a few days for her to relax fully, but I could see the change in her. She laughed more. She shared her drawings without hesitation. The little shadow that had been following her around for months was gone. A week after Marianne left, Laura came home from work with a sealed envelope in her hand. It's from her, she said, setting it on the counter. Do you want to read it? I shook my head. Do you? She didn't answer right away. Then she picked it up, tore it in half without looking inside, and dropped it into the trash. I already know what it says, and I'm done letting her voice live here. That night over dinner, we told Emily about a trip we'd been planning quietly for weeks. Remember how you've always wanted to go to San Diego to see the art museum and the zoo? Laura asked. Emily's eyes lit up instantly. Really? Really? I said. We're going next month, just the three of us. It wasn't a grand gesture to erase the past. It was a statement about the future. Our future. The next morning, Laura cleared out the guest room that had been Marianne's domain. We repainted the walls a warm, soft yellow and set up a large art desk in the corner for Emily, complete with shelves for her supplies and a corkboard for her work. By the end of the weekend, it no longer felt like a place where someone had schemed and poisoned the air. It felt like Emily's space, and that was the point. A few weeks later, I found myself watching Emily at her new desk, humming softly as she painted. Laura came up beside me and slipped her hand into mine. You know, she said quietly, I kept thinking I owed her something, because she's my mother, because she raised me. But the truth is, she taught me the wrong things, and I'm finally unlearning them. I squeezed her hand. We're building something better. She nodded. Yeah, we are. For the first time in a long time, I felt certain that the cycle was broken. We hadn't just removed Marianne from our house, we'd removed her from the space she occupied in our minds. And in that space, we'd made room for something new, peace trust and the kind of family that's chosen every single day.